In the early 20th century, Alto Adige found itself at the center of one of the most dramatic shifts in European history. After the First World War, this region, long part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was annexed by Italy. And almost overnight, everything began to change. Language, identity, and even the way people lived and worked the land. For the people of Alto Adige, this wasn't just a political shift, it was a complete redefinition of who they were. The 20th century was, by any measure, the most turbulent period in the history of Alto Adige, and the wine industry felt every tremor. Alto Adige became part of Italy after World War I, annexed in 1919 as Austria-Hungary disintegrated. For a region that had been Austrian for 700 years, this was not a seamless transition. The fascist government that came to power in Italy in the 1920s immediately began suppressing German cultural identity in the region. In the mid-1920s, Alto Adige was prohibited from using German names. Even the word Tirol was banned. German language instruction in schools was ended. The entire cultural identity of a 70% German-speaking region was subjected to forced Italianization. For the wine industry specifically, the fascist government withdrew all financial support for winemakers at the very moment when phylloxera was still causing damage across vineyards. The combination was brutal. The 1930s were even harder. Agricultural workers were presented with a stark alternative: uproot their vines and plant apple orchards. The apple was becoming increasingly profitable, and the economics were compelling. Significant areas of historical vineyard land converted to fruit orchards during this period. By the end of the decade, vine surface had dropped to 8,757 hectares, 1,800 less than when World War I began. There was one positive development amid the misery. A royal decree on wine in 1931 was introduced, for the first time in Italy, the concept of vini tipici, typical wines that had to be protected by law. The Alto Adige wines protected under this first wave of Italian wine law were Santa Maddalena, Caldaro, Milanese, Terlano, and Lagrein de Gris. World War II brought further disruption. Many cooperatives went into debt and some went bankrupt. But after the war, reconstruction began with characteristic determination. Compensation accords were signed with Switzerland, and from 1949, it became possible again to export wine to northern Tyrol. In the 1950s and 1960s, increased yield allowed producers to export large quantities, particularly Schiava, which was beloved in beer-drinking northern markets that wanted a light, easy red. The wine drove tourism, and the tourism drove more wine. But this volume-focused strategy was carrying the seeds of its own crisis. The changes brought by war and fascism reshaped Alto Adige in profound ways. But for the people working the land, survival meant finding new ways to adapt. And one of the most important responses was the development of a system that would define the region for decades to come. Before we continue to the crisis of the 1980s, we need to understand the cooperative system in Alto Adige because it is fundamental to everything that happens next. And frankly, it is one of the most interesting and unusual wine business models in the world. But to understand why cooperatives exist, you first need to understand the economic catastrophe that made them necessary. When feudal rights were suppressed between 1848 and 1853, farmers who had previously owed service to their lords were now nominally free, but they had to pay a third of the value of their land annually. At the same moment, fungal diseases were ravaging vineyards across the region. Floods were destroying harvests. Custom duties on the import of wine from other parts of Italy were reduced, causing a decline of up to 40% in the price of grape must in Alto Adige, which depended heavily on exportation. Large and medium-sized wineries could weather this. They sold most of their wine independently. But small and independent producers, the vast majority of growers, had no such leverage. In most cases, the price of must was fixed at levels so low that small producers found themselves sinking into debt. crushed by rising interest on taxes and collapsing vineyard values. They had no storage facilities, no market knowledge, and no distribution network. Huge quantities of their harvests were sold at whatever price they could get, which was often barely above nothing. From 1869 to 1892, 28,052 agricultural businesses in the region, not only vineyards, but farms of all kinds, were put up for auction. A generation of small farmers was being wiped out. The solution came from an unexpected direction: Prussia. In 1867, a model for cooperative association based on collective self-help and communal solidarity was proposed there, establishing that when an individual's means are insufficient, a group's collective resources can substitute. This became the legal foundation for the Austrian cooperative law of April 9, 1873. The idea reached Alto Adige 2 decades later. The cantine sociali, cooperative wineries, began forming in the 1890s. The model was straightforward in concept. Small growers who couldn't afford equipment, expertise, or market access individually pooled their grapes and shared the costs of production, marketing, and distribution. A cooperative cannot be subject to a hostile takeover. It cannot be dominated by a single shareholder. Each member has one vote, regardless of how much land they farm. The goal isn't to maximize dividends, it is to ensure that every member receives a fair price for their grapes. The first wine-focused cantine sociali were founded in Andraiano, Terlano, and Degna. Between 1893 and 1909, 18 cantine sociali were founded across the region. These were not passive commercial arrangements. The members took them with complete seriousness. In many cases, shareholders personally contributed labor to the construction of the cooperative buildings to save money. Apartments were built inside or adjacent to the cooperatives to house the mastro cantiniere and other workers. Cooperatives strategically positioned themselves near railways, and in some cases built their own connecting tracks to stations at Caldaro and San Michele, minimizing the cost of moving wine to market. There is one detail about membership that reveals a great deal about the era. Women were permitted to be members and shareholders of the cooperatives, but they could only exercise their vote in the General Assembly after Alto Adige was annexed to Italy. For nearly 3 decades, women could own a share, but had no voice in how it was run. It took the redrawing of national borders to correct that. The cooperatives endured decades of brutal pressure, mainly due to World War I and World War II. Many went into debt and some went bankrupt entirely. The wars destroyed markets, disrupted supply chains, and in some cases physically destroyed the facilities that members had built with their own hands. Toward the end of the 1960s, a significant logistical shift occurred. Delivery of grapes replaced the transport of must, meaning growers brought their grapes directly to the cooperative winery rather than processing them partially on site. This change made harvest more efficient and significantly improved wine quality. The cooperatives invested in their infrastructure: climate-controlled cellars, steel fermentation vats, modern presses and machinery, and tasting rooms. By 1949, cooperatives were already exporting around a quarter of their production. Today, 14 cantine sociali manage 3,491 hectares, 62.8% of vine service, and account for 65% of total wine production in Alto Adige. And here's what makes this model so extraordinary in a global context. Even though the vine surface controlled by cooperatives has increased by 65% over recent decades, the harvest volume has increased by only 15%. That gap is deliberate. It reflects the conscious decision to produce less and produce better, a philosophy that the cooperatives have adopted at institutional scale. Unlike almost everywhere else in Italy and the wine world, where cooperatives are typically associated with bulk, low-cost production, the cooperatives of Alto Adige produce some of the most critically acclaimed wines in the country. They regularly win prestigious awards. They produce prized individual wines in large quantities, reflecting decades of investment in research, technology, and quality viticulture. For a time, the cooperative system offered stability. It allowed growers to survive difficult economic and political environments. But that stability came at a cost, because over time, the focus shifted toward quantity rather than quality. And by the late 20th century, that approach was beginning to show its limits. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the underlying weakness of this quantity-focused model became impossible to ignore. The wine in Alto Adige had historically been sold in bulk, in tanks, not bottles, primarily to the Swiss and German markets. It was blended with other Italian wine and sold without strong geographic identity. The wines were often labeled simply by variety in 1-liter bottles with no premium positioning. Then the wholesale price for wine dropped by 40% in the early 80s. The economic logic of high volume, low price wine was suddenly catastrophic. Producers who had been increasing yield to compensate for falling per unit prices found that the strategy was hitting a wall. Schiava was the symbol of this crisis. At its peak, Schiava accounted for 60% of Alto Adige production. It was being sold in vast quantities at low prices, losing its reputation and its value simultaneously. Pinot Nero and Gewürztraminer were also being bottled in 1-liter format, which sent a very clear message to the market about the perceived quality of these wines. Then, in the mid-1980s, something shifted. Winemakers began returning to planting local varieties in their rightful zones. There was a deliberate switch from red to white wine production, which meant a dramatic reduction in Schiava, from 60% of production down to around 20%. More importantly, for the first time in the history of this region, the focus shifted from quantity to quality. This was not a small adjustment. This was a fundamental restructuring of an entire industry's philosophy. Luis Lagaveur was one of the first to introduce wooden barrel aging for white wines in 1982, following advice from his friend Robert Mondavi. Yeah, that Robert Mondavi. The use of barrique for Alto Adige whites opened up entirely new aging potential. In 1987, Paolo Foradori, at J. Hofstadter in Termino, adopted the Burgundy Grand Cru model and labeled 2 wines with their exact vineyard of origin. The first time in Alto Adige history that a wine label specified a single vineyard. He is considered the father of the Viña Weingarten concept, the designation that allows wineries to showcase the unique characteristics of a single small plot. A Viña Weingarten wine cannot exceed 20 hectares, and only contiguous vine regions that are clearly identified and delimited qualify. Each plot must be within 100 meters of the others. This was the philosophical revolution. From bulk anonymity to specific identity, from quantity to terroir, from liter bottles to limited single vineyard expressions. The 1990s continued the transformation. Grapes that had been planted in zones too cool for red wines were replaced with white varieties after about 10 years. Data-driven decisions replacing tradition-driven ones. In the 2000s, Alto Adige completed its transition from primarily red to primarily white wine country. Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon, and Gewürztraminer grew significantly in planted area, along with Chardonnay, Riesling, and Müller-Thurgau. The biggest cooperatives finally stopped selling wine in 1-liter bottles in 2010, after being pressured from the protection agency. That pressure, it turns out, was well placed. The quality revolution transformed Alto Adige. It redefined what this region could produce and how it was seen by the rest of the world. But no transformation is ever final, because today the challenges facing this region are once again beginning to change. Alto Adige stands at a particularly interesting intersection with climate change, one that makes it simultaneously a cautionary tale and a story of remarkable adaptability. Temperatures in Alto Adige have risen by approximately 1 degree Celsius since the 1990s. To put that in context, the global average temperature increase has been measured since the 1850s, and it has reached a similar level over a much longer period. Alto Adige is warming at roughly double the global average rate. The effects are visible in the vineyards. The harvest date for Sauvignon Blanc, for example, has shifted from around October 5th to August 31st, a move of over 5 weeks earlier in the season. Vines are being planted at progressively higher altitudes, seeking the cooler temperatures that lower elevations no longer reliably provide. The long-term implication is significant. If temperatures continue rising, Alto Adige, currently a white wine stronghold, could shift toward red wine production. The warming would theoretically allow red varieties to ripen fully at altitudes that are currently too cool for them. The key advantage this region has, though, is altitude. Unlike most wine regions, which are bounded by their climate, Alto Adige has mountains. There's always a higher slope to plant on. Where other regions face the prospect of vineyards becoming too warm to produce their signature wines, Alto Adige can simply move uphill. There is also something worth pausing on that is easy to overlook in a conversation about large wine companies and DOC regulations. The fact that so many small, independent wineries have survived in Alto Adige is, by any global measure, a remarkable achievement. Most wine regions with comparable economic pressures have seen small producers absorbed into larger structures or simply disappear. Here, they have endured, and there are signs that their survival is increasingly an asset rather than a merely heritage curiosity. Consumers around the world are increasingly drawn to small producer wines precisely because they offer something that large commercial operations cannot: a personal connection to the people and the place behind the wine. Wineries that have built efficient direct sales operations online have found that people actively prefer to buy wine directly from the producer rather than through commercial channels. But the most important reason for optimism about Alto Adige's future is institutional. This region has built a scientific infrastructure for viticulture that few places in the world can match. The Istituto Agrario di San Michele all'Adige, founded in 1874, has been a cornerstone of viticultural research for a century and a half. The Centro di Sperimentazione Limburg, founded in 1975, complements it with a more applied, problem-solving focus. When a producer encounters a disease, a climate anomaly, or a viticultural challenge, the Limburg is there to help diagnose and resolve it. In its 60 years of operation, the Limburg Institute has trained and developed the majority of professionals working in viticulture and fruit agriculture in Alto Adige. The evolution of its institutional focus tells the story of the region's priorities over time. In the 1960s, the focus was on selecting clones with high yields resistant to the main viruses of the era. In the 1980s, the emphasis shifted to qualitative characteristics of the grape. Today, the work focuses on selecting new clones, determining the suitability of rootstocks under changing conditions, and addressing the most pressing challenges of the coming decades. With the appearance of acid rot in increasingly warm and unpredictable harvests, current research focuses on varieties with sparse bunches that are less susceptible to the condition. To combat climate change directly, the emphasis is on developing late harvest clones with higher acidity levels combined with elevated quality, and on rootstocks that are more resistant to drought, which is becoming an increasingly serious concern as summer rainfall patterns shift. In terms of entirely new varieties, the focus is on peewee wines, the fungus-resistant hybrids, along with 30 other varieties of high-quality white and red wine with late ripening and higher tolerance to heat and drought. These are not emergency measures. They are decades-long breeding programs designed to ensure that the region can continue producing excellent wine as the conditions under which it has always operated gradually change. To preserve biodiversity, some of the most ancient local varieties are collected, analyzed with molecular biology technology, and conserved in a dedicated repository. The Giardini di Castel Trautmannsdorf in Merano, a remarkable botanical garden, offers a living collection of varieties of particular historical significance. Some of these grapes exist nowhere else in the world. Losing them would mean losing something irreplaceable. The most forward-looking expression of the scientific investment is the Lido, the Limburg Integrated Digital Orchard, a new open-space digital laboratory where the vineyards of the future are being actively designed and tested, including irrigation systems controlled by sensors that respond in real time to soil moisture and weather data. There is also the Alto Adige Fruit and Viticulture Consulting Center's Downy Mildew Alert System, 29 meteorological stations distributed across the wine region, each supervised by a local vintner. When rain occurs, the supervising vintner communicates meteorological values to the center, which then assesses the risk of downy mildew and sends an alert to the relevant producers. This is the marriage of ancient knowledge, the vintner who knows their specific piece of land, with contemporary technology. It is genuinely an elegant system. Around 10% of vineyards are already cultivated using certified organic methods. And the region notes that this is more difficult to achieve here than in other places, but the commitment is there. The Agenda 2030 of the Consorzio Vino Alto Adige has set clear goals: completely organic fertilizers, replacement of single-use plastic with biodegradable materials, and optimization of water use. The wine region that has been farming these slopes for 3,600 years is thinking carefully about what happens in the next 3,600. So even now, Alto Adige continues to evolve, shaped by the same forces that have always defined it: change, adaptation, and resilience. And today, Alto Adige is one of the most distinctive wine regions in Italy, not because it followed a straight path, but because it didn't. Over centuries, this region has been shaped by geography, empire, crisis, and conflict. It's changed languages, changed borders, and at times been forced to redefine its identity entirely. And yet, through all of that, winemaking never disappeared. It adapted, it evolved, and eventually it became something unique. Today, the wines of Alto Adige reflect all of that history, not just the land, but the people, the struggles, and the decisions that shaped them. And maybe that's what makes this region so compelling. Not just where it is, but everything it has been through to become what it is today. Because in Alto Adige, every bottle is a story.